I study Puerto Rican popular culture, and I'm specifically looking at representations of lamentation. So I'm taking lamentation from a theoretical framework of medieval studies, and I translocate it into the Caribbean to pay attention to the histories that have been buried, right, by hegemonic institutions like the state. Lamentations is a space for folks to grieve, mourn, and appease the dead to the living, right? Like, folks are grieving, and this grief is communicating something really important. So this is a type of affect that folks use to archive histories when they didn't have access to pen and paper. Also understanding that popular culture is a barometer to think about, like, what is society really saying? And throughout this research that I've done in my dissertation, Lamentation shows us as a critical intervention to think about histories, right, that have been buried and have been untold or undertold. And it's also a decolonial liberatory praxis in the sense that folks utilize lamentations as a gateway to sociopolitical uprisings and manifestation. So giving space to lamentation allows us to view what people are really crying about, right? But also expose the entrails of colonialism and coloniality. This is a really powerful thing, right? It's a powerful affect, it's a powerful ritual. It's almost like rebelling against empire in certain capacities. Remembering it's a rebellious act against empire and against hegemonic systems. Hegemonic systems don't want us to know these things. They don't want us to know the way that Black people are continuously murdered and criminalized. But when we really pay attention to what people are grieving, we can see how problematic these systems of domination are. And Afro-Puerto Ricans are constantly criminalized, they're constantly murdered, right, by the state. And I use Puerto Rico as a case study because Puerto Rico is the longest standing colony in the Western Hemisphere. And so my dissertation, I specifically look at several facets of Puerto Rican popular culture. The first chapter analyzes Bomba, which was a majority of the work that I did through CLACS. I was able to do some ethnographic work in Bomba and go to the archives in Puerto Rico. There's a really important archival history through the body, through the rhythm, through the dancing, through lyrics. These were folks who are either enslaved or freely nude people. And so I think it's really important to think about, like, how they utilize the body to archive their history. When Bomba was criminalized, when Bomba was abject, when Bomba was not accessible. In the 19th century, there's like police records of women or just people who, if they stayed out late in a bombazo, I mean, they were put to jail because they thought they were prostitutes. They were labeled as grotesque. They were labeled as unlistenable. They're like, you cannot stand this music. That's not how people think of Bomba now. Now, Bomba is like this Puerto Rican emblem of Africanness. And then the last chapter analyzes post-ecological disaster aesthetics and poetics and literature. And so specifically looks at Hurricane Maria and kind of this period. After Hurricane Maria, there was this big cultural boom. People are writing, they're creating plays, they're having music, painting, etc. And so I denote it as a modern colonial city lament, which is kind of these lamentations of the destruction of a city that respond, or rather expose, colonial enterprises and the violence of modernity and coloniality. Perreo Combativo is combative twerking, and it kind of took place in the 2019 summer protests in Puerto Rico. These protests, I argue, were catalyzed by Lamentations. The then governor, Rico, his WhatsApp chat leaked, and he had these ridiculously transphobic, misogynistic comments. But one of the things too is he made fun of victims of the hurricane. 4,645 people died as a result of state mismanagement, of disaster. And so I feel like this is when Black queer women and Black queer people in the archipelago were kind of having these convocations to protest, to manifest. They're like, this is wrong, right? And so I felt like this collective trauma of Maria, that's still kind of a wound, really brought people together in these protests. And so and I contextualize that to then speak about Perreo Combativo as this kind of combative liberatory praxis, right? So Perreo Combativo happened in front of the cathedral of this famous colonial space, and they just put reggaeton, and then, you know, they just start twerking. The woman is in the Puerto Rican flag bikini. And so here, like, she's really questioning respectability politics, but she's also utilizing her body as a form of protest. It's like really important to think, what are they protesting, right? Which is like the control of the body. They're protesting patriarchal norms and heteronormative society in Puerto Rico, but they're also kind of like utilizing their body as this liberatory praxis, right? And it's combative because it's in your face, you know, and they don't care, you know, they're just like very like, I'm gonna move my body the way that I want to, whether you like how I present myself or not. And one might not think Perreo Combativo is calling into this kind of like lamentation, but I argue that's what leads to it. That's what leads to these moments of liberation. It's like, I felt my feelings, I saw the inequalities and the injustices. Now I'm gonna use my agency that I get from this practice and do what I want. And I think this is why archival research is so important, right? Because we really need to trace the way that certain things continue to stay consistent. CLACS gave me the funds and the avenue to be able to go to Puerto Rico and do these archival research and ethnographic research. So I was able to kind of gather more information on Bomba, and kind of really think about like, what is the archive saying versus how are people expressing versus how do practitioners of Bomba use Bomba. I think it's really great to have an institution on campus, right, that's like really paying attention to work done in Latin America and the kind of interventions that can bring, but also how it can bring us all together, right, and thinking beyond just measures and borders, right? But kind of really bringing us scholars together to really converse about these things that are happening across our countries, right? Like, this is not just a phenomenon independent to Puerto Rico, right? Like, Puerto Ricans are not the only ones who are lamenting.